She thought she was just doing the right thing, but when she told the billionaire the truth, what happened next left everyone speechless. The upscale restaurant buzzed with chatter, crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over the neatly set tables. Emma Carter, a hard-working waitress, moved quickly between guests, making sure everything ran smoothly. She had seen all kinds of customers, businessmen, celebrities, even billionaires. But tonight, one particular table caught her attention. At a secluded corner table sat Jonathan Hale, billionaire investor, one of the richest men in the country. He was dressed in a sharp suit, scrolling through his phone while waiting for someone. His wife. Emma knew, because she had seen them here before. They were a power couple, always in the headlines. But tonight, something was wrong, because Jonathan's wife wasn't coming to meet him. Emma had seen her just 30 minutes ago, in the arms of another man. In a dimly lit booth at the other side of the restaurant, Mrs. Hale was laughing, leaning in close to a man who was definitely not her husband. Their hands touched in ways that left no room for doubt. Emma's stomach turned. She wasn't the type to get involved in other people's business. But Jonathan Hale had always been kind, never arrogant, never rude to the staff. And now, he was sitting there, completely unaware. Emma took a deep breath. Was she really about to do this? She hesitated, but then made her decision. Walking up to his table, she leaned in slightly and whispered, "Mr. Hale, I think you need to know something." Jonathan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." Her voice was careful but firm. "Your wife, she's here, but she's not alone." Jonathan's expression didn't change, but his grip on the glass in front of him tightened. Emma braced herself for the fallout, but what happened next? She never saw it coming. Jonathan set his glass down slowly, carefully, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Emma thought maybe he hadn't heard her, or maybe he didn't believe her. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen a few times. Ding. Across the restaurant, at the dimly lit booth where his wife sat with another man, her phone lit up on the table. Emma held her breath as Mrs. Hale picked it up, glanced at the screen, and instantly went pale. Jonathan exhaled, looking almost disappointed, not angry, not surprised. He glanced up at Emma, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. "Where exactly?" She hesitated, then subtly nodded toward the other side of the restaurant. Jonathan didn't rush. He simply buttoned his suit jacket, stood, and adjusted his cuffs like he had all the time in the world. The kind of composure only a billionaire could have. Emma swallowed. She had expected an explosion, a confrontation, a scene. Instead, Jonathan walked toward his wife's table with terrifying calmness. Mrs. Hale was already shifting uncomfortably, her hands gripping her phone as she whispered frantically to the man sitting across from her. But it was too late. Jonathan stopped at the edge of their booth, sliding his hands into his pockets. "Darling," he said smoothly, "having a nice dinner?" His wife's face drained of color. The man across from her looked like he wanted to disappear. Emma stood frozen, watching from a distance. And what happened next would change everything. Mrs. Hale swallowed hard, forcing a nervous smile. "Jonathan, what are you doing here?" Jonathan tilted his head slightly, his expression eerily calm. "Funny, I was just about to ask you the same thing." The man sitting across from her, a younger, sharply dressed guy, shifted uncomfortably. He knew exactly who Jonathan Hale was. Jonathan's gaze flicked toward him. "And you are—" The man hesitated before mumbling, "Daniel." Jonathan smirked. "Daniel, nice to meet you. Do you always have dinner with married women, or is this a special occasion?" Mrs. Hale stammered, reaching for Jonathan's arm. "Jonathan, please, it's not what it looks like." He took a step back. "Spare me." Then he did something Emma never expected. He pulled out an envelope and tossed it onto the table. Mrs. Hale's hands trembled as she picked it up. Her eyes widened when she saw what was inside. Divorce papers, dated weeks ago. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Jonathan had already known. He leaned down slightly, his voice low but firm. "You think I didn't see this coming? You think I didn't know exactly who you are?" Mrs. Hale's lips parted, but no words came out. Jonathan straightened, buttoning his jacket. "I was just waiting to see how long it would take for you to show your true colors." He turned toward Daniel, smirking. "And you, my friend, just made this much easier for me." Daniel's face burned red. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Mrs. Hale's breathing grew frantic. "Jonathan, please, we can fix this." But Jonathan had already stepped back. "You already did," he said coolly. "Enjoy your dinner." And with that he walked away. Not broken, not angry, just done. Emma stood frozen behind the counter as Jonathan approached her. He paused, looking at her thoughtfully. "You didn't have to tell me." Emma swallowed. "I would have wanted someone to tell me." Jonathan studied her for a moment, then nodded. Honest people are rare these days. He pulled out his wallet, grabbed a few crisp bills, and set them on the counter. Emma's eyes widened. It wasn't a tip. It was enough to cover weeks of rent. Her lips parted. Mr. Hale, I can't." He smirked. "Consider it a reward for doing the right thing." Then, with the same calm composure, he walked out of the restaurant, free, unbothered, and completely in control. And in that moment, Emma realized. She hadn't just witnessed the end of a marriage. She had just watched a billionaire win a game no one even knew he was playing. 1 year later, Emma wiped down a table at the small café she had been working at for the past few months. Things were better now, but she was still just getting by. She hadn't forgotten that night. The way Jonathan Hale had handled everything with absolute control, like he had expected it all along. The generous tip he had left her had helped keep her afloat for a while, but life moved on, and so did she. Or so she thought. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and when she looked up, her heart nearly stopped. Jonathan Hale walked in, just as composed as ever, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. She blinked, wondering if he even remembered her, but then his gaze locked onto hers, and he smirked. "Emma Carter." She swallowed, setting down her rag. "Mr. Hale, this is unexpected." He glanced around the small cafe before meeting her gaze again. "Not really." Her brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Jonathan pulled a sleek envelope from his coat and set it on the counter. "I've been keeping an eye on you." Emma's heart pounded. "Why?" He tilted his head slightly. "Because good people deserve better opportunities." She hesitated before slowly picking up the envelope. Inside was an offer letter, an executive assistant position at Hale Industries. Her breath caught. The salary was more money than she had ever seen in her life. Her hands trembled. "I don't understand. Why me?" Jonathan leaned in slightly, his voice smooth but firm. "Because I don't forget the people who do right by me." Emma looked up at him, her entire world shifting. 1 year ago, she had simply told the truth. Now, that truth was changing her life forever. And as Jonathan gave her a knowing smirk and walked away, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a job offer. It was the start of something much bigger. 6 months later, Emma adjusted the sleek blazer she never thought she'd own as she walked through the grand glass doors of Hale Industries. 6 months ago, she was wiping tables in a small cafe. Now she was the executive assistant to one of the most powerful men in the country, and working for Jonathan Hale. It was nothing like she expected. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was calculated, always thinking 5 steps ahead, never letting emotions cloud his judgment. And yet, he trusted her. She was the first to know about every deal, every major decision. He valued her input, sought her advice, even asked for her opinion in meetings where no assistant should have had a voice. And the strangest part? She wasn't intimidated by him anymore. She knocked on the door to his office, waiting for the familiar, "Come in." Jonathan looked up from his desk, smirking slightly. "You're early." Emma raised an eyebrow. "You say that like you're surprised." He chuckled, setting his pen down. "I've learned never to underestimate you." She handed him the latest report. "The investors are expecting you at 8. Also, your legal team finalized the acquisition papers for the new tech startup." Jonathan flipped through the pages, nodding approvingly. "Good work." She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I have to ask, why did you really hire me?" He glanced up, studying her carefully. "Because you're honest, and honesty is rare in my world." Emma held his gaze, feeling the weight of his words. "And?" she pressed. His smirk returned, but this time there was something different in his eyes, something unreadable. "And because I knew you'd be sitting right here 6 months later, asking me that question." Emma let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You're impossible." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, watching her with amusement. "No, Emma, I'm just always right." She rolled her eyes but couldn't fight the small smile tugging at her lips. Because maybe, just maybe, Jonathan Hale wasn't as impossible as she once thought. And as she turned to leave his office, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning.